Brendan O'Connor, welcome.
Morning.
The fresh look at the privacy issue arises from a 3-year-old report. Somebody has a good memory.
Well, the Australian Law Reform Commission report is a very comprehensive report, 2,700 pages, but it goes to a whole number of areas in our society, and one of which, of course, is whether we need a statutory right of privacy in this country. And I think, given the scandal overseas and some mass breaches of privacy in Australia, there are some questions as to whether we have sufficient protection afforded to ordinary citizens in this country, and for that reason I've brought that recommendation forward.
But you talk about the scandal overseas. It's already illegal to hack into telephones. You don't need to change that.
Well, that's right. There are criminal sanctions against certain behaviour in this country.
So why then is the experience in the UK relevant to this?
The Law Reform Commission has said, well, do people have sufficient protection when their privacy is seriously invaded, and do they have redress if indeed their privacy is invaded in such a manner? And I think these are very important questions for us to consider. And I do see them in the context of striking the right balance between freedom of expression on one hand and the right to privacy on the other. These are two ideals the government supports. We just need to know whether we've got the balance right.
But give us a sense of what really concerns you about the way the media operates in Australia.
Well, it's not just about the media. As I've tried to make clear, in relation to the tort of privacy, it's about whether a person has afforded proper protection. So, for example, it could be just as a case where a man who's a former boyfriend of a woman sends sexually explicit material to her family and to her employer and invades her privacy in such a manner that she deserves redress. Do we have sufficient laws in place? The Law Reform Commission says that's not sufficient to date, and I think we should examine that. In relation to the media do have a responsibility to make sure that they have regard to a person's privacy. I mean, we saw gross violations overseas, but I have said very clearly that if it's in the public interest, then I don't expect people to be able to invoke that right to privacy. So if the personal information goes to matters of a public interest, then it would override that right.
Yeah, but are you saying, though, that the media in Australia are too intrusive? Even occasionally?
Well, I think there are examples where there's been serious invasion. I think what happens is you see material that might be titillating, and we're all complicit because we'll read the information, but it might be titillating one day, forgotten the next. But for the person whose information has been disclosed and used as fodder for the media, that has ruined their life, and I think we have to take those things into consideration.
Then it comes down to a question of definition. And you're walking that fine line between freedom of speech and the right to privacy.
Well, and as it should be the case, and that's why courts would determine on the facts whether, in fact, the right to disclose prevails upon the right to privacy. These are competing ideals, as I say, but neither of these ideals are absolute. There are qualifications for both.
But you are picking on this at a time when clearly you're surfing in off what's going on in the UK, so even if it's not opportunistic, it's certainly tactical to do it now.
Well, it's timely, no less timely than Mr Hartigan putting in place protocols to respond to the concerns that he has about what the scandals overseas means to his organisation here. I think what...
But that doesn't represent in any sense guilt on his part, or even a suspicion of guilt.
Absolutely not. But what there is, as a result of the quite scandalous, gross invasions of privacy overseas, is a concern, I believe, in the community that we need to make sure we have sufficient protection afforded to ordinary citizens. And now I've seen references to the rich and powerful. I'm talking about people who deserve proper protection, and I think the Law Reform Commission has made clear that they don't believe there is such protection, and the government wants to look at it.
And it's the timing of the thing, though, when Senator Stephen Conroy is going on about his annoyance with News Limited constantly. Is he freelancing, or is this a concern that runs through government?
Well, look, you know, editors of newspapers will have a go at ministers, and ministers might have a go back. These things happen. I mean, these are unrelated to I didn't sort of invent the Law Reform Commission's report or contrive the recommendations. They were going to be attended to either this year or next. I've brought them forward because I do believe, as a result of the worldwide interest in the scandals, where you've seen gross invasion of, I mean, to think that you could could hack into a murdered child's phone to get information for a story seems to me quite disturbing.
But that's illegal. It's illegal. You don't need to change the laws to deal with that.
But what does the parent, if there was something like that happen in this country, what would the family members of that child be able to do in terms of civil redress? Now, I'm not suggesting there wouldn't be criminal sanctions, but what civil rights would they have? What redress remedy would they have to that invasion, that gross invasion of privacy? Now, I'm not suggesting it happens here, but I do think there are invasions of privacy, and with the technological change and the way in which information flows, there are questions about whether we have sufficient laws to protect ordinary Australians.
OK, with your Home Affairs cap on now in the Malaysian Agreement, are you able to confirm that, that those people sent to Malaysia will have special access to jobs?
Well, Minister Bowen has made clear that he's at the final stages of reaching an agreement that was, of course, announced on the 7th of May. He's also made clear that he's had extensive discussions, as has Minister Hishammuddin, the Home Affairs Minister of Malaysia, with the UNHCR. That's a very important element of this agreement. I mean, this is an historic and innovative approach to, I think, undermining the people smugglers model. And I do believe that, look, the details have to be ultimately announced by the ministers once the agreement is struck. But the UNHCR has been involved, and I think that in itself...
They've agreed to sign up to it?
Well, I'm saying to you that there's been very close engagement, and as we know, both Prime Ministers on the 7th of May said that those people we would send to Malaysia would be treated with dignity, and indeed I'm sure there's more detail that will come with an announcement by Minister Bowen and Minister Hishammuddin whenever that is.
If they do get a special deal, though, as compared with those who are in the queue already, do you see that this might pose particular problems, that people might say, well, at least we'll get something if we make the run to Australia. At least we'll get a special deal ahead of those already in Malaysia.
Well, we want to treat people fairly, but we do know that this is an innovative approach, as I say, and we believe it will undermine the people smugglers model, which is effectively saying, if you get on this vessel, we'll get you to Australia and you'll be settled there. Now, we know, we've seen people get on unseaworthy vessels on perilous journeys, in some cases leading to maritime disasters. We need to stop this approach, and we believe that this approach is the most effective. And indeed, since even the announcement on the 7th of May, you've seen a very significant decline in irregular arrivals in that period. 500 or so people have arrived compared with what would have been 1,700 in the same period last year. So we're already seeing, I think, impacts as a result of the announcement on the 7th.
But still 500 have arrived. What's the status now for those 500? Because presumably they won't be included under whatever agreement is announced tomorrow. Well,
Minister Bowen has made clear that those people that arrived after that date should not assume they'll be settled here. Again, the Minister will have more to say on that.
Stronger language than that, he said they wouldn't be settled here.
Yeah, and he'll have more to say about that, but what we are doing is making sure we put in place, I think, a very important sustainable solution to this complex regional problem, and having this approach, I think, will see a continued decline, because in the end, the people smugglers who seek to reap profit from human misery will not be able to sell the message they're currently selling.
Kevin Rudd said from Bali yesterday that there have been some significant progress in terms of Papua New Guinea being used as a third country. Can you update us on that?
Well, only to say that I know that PNG has an interest in reaching agreement with Australia, but there's some time off. We know that they've gone through their own troubles. They've had a very ill Prime Minister, and of course there's now been changes within government, which I think has put things back a little. But we'll continue to discuss with PNG the option of a centre there. We think it's a very important part of the overall package. And I also wanted to indicate, as I should have earlier, that that the Malaysian arrangement, of course, would allow for 4,000 refugees to come here, and that's why, again, we say that there's a good message, but it also allows for a humanitarian dimension, which I think was lacking in earlier agreements by earlier governments.
Now, you spent some time this week discussing the new R18 classification for violent video games. We read this morning that the person accused of the massacre in Norway actually looks at these games, has a collection of these sorts of violent games, should people be allowed to view them at all?
Well, just firstly on the R18 classification, I mean, this is an historic agreement. It's been on the agenda of Attorneys General for 9 years, but I have to make clear that this is going to ensure that we don't allow violent games played by 15-year-olds. At the moment, the most popular adult-themed games that are played only lawfully by adults around the world are played by 15-year-olds here. That will change as a result of the introduction of the R18, and will still keep out violent, very violent, sexually violent games. They'll be prohibited from access lawfully in this country. But look, because there's a madman who's done just such atrocities in Norway, I don't think means that we're going to close down film or the engagement with games. I think it really points to, of course, a person who's clearly there's something wrong with this person to sort of cause such devastation in Norway. But I'm not sure that the argument goes that as a result of watching a game you turn into that type of person. I think there's something clearly intrinsically wrong with him.
Because, of course, what you're doing is designed to deny access to children, but maybe it's unhinged adults that are really the problem when they're using this stuff.
And that's why, as I say, look, just in relation to film or video games, we have a refused classification, and I'm not looking to remove the most violent elements from that refused classification. We're going to make sure there's proper protection, and there will be material that cannot be accessed by adults. But most importantly, the 50 most popular adult games that are currently played by 15-year-olds here won't be played by them once we've reclassified them.
Thanks for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Barry.